This is James Taylor, and you're listening to The Creative Life. The Creative Life podcast is a show created for you, the creative. If you're looking for inspiration, motivation, and advice while at home, at work, or on your daily commute, then this show is for you. Each episode brings you a successful creative, whether that's a musician, writer, artist, designer, performer, educator, or creative entrepreneur. They share their journey, their successes, their failures, their creative process, their insights, and much, much more. In this episode, I talk with Olivia Tarplin. She is an academic writer, researcher, and speaker, and we talk about tips on giving a great TED Talk, how to deal with haters and critics, and finally, the perils of the freemium model. Enjoy the episode. Hey, it's James Taylor, and I'm delighted today to have Olivia Tarplin. And Olivia is a Jersey City-based academic writer, researcher, and speaker on gender, politics, sexuality, and the media. Focusing on the thriving industry of feminist pornography, she has spent the past 3 years studying how it can be used to change sexual culture and educate the masses about sex. A keen photographer, she initially considered studying photography but feared that an academic setting might spoil her love of the medium. Instead, she chose to study global studies at the New School in New York, which has led her on to the exciting work that she does today. So, Olivia, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
So, share with our listeners, what's going on in your world just now?
Right now, I am living in Jersey City. I work at a marketing firm in Manhattan as my day job, and I am continuing my research on feminist pornography and sex education tied together. I'm going deeper and deeper into it. I'm researching more feminist pornography and its relationship with economics and the challenges it's facing with distribution and how it's sort of competing with mainstream porn as well as trying to exist within it. So I'm going deeper and deeper into that. I'm working on a website that I will be publishing my writing on, which is very exciting, but I have absolutely no experience doing that. So it's slow going. But that's what I'm working on right now.
And I mentioned at the start, you were interested in photography, and then you decided to. The thing you got the kind of most passion from was kind of researching and the academic side around gender and politics and sexuality. So, talk to us about how did you, when you first went to the New School, was it immediate that when you went there that these were the things you wanted to really kind of learn and develop in your writing, or was it a kind of a winding path where you kind of you had to kind of feel your way a little bit?
Well, I actually went. I always wanted to go to the New School because it has a wonderful history of progressive values and liberalism, and it's a great school. And I went there. I originally wanted to do psychology. And I started with psychology classes, and I remember being in a lot of psych classes and realizing that I was frustrated with a lot of the scientific methods that they would use because I thought they were quite exclusionary. I have one memory of we were learning about a study they did about families, and they said in order for our pool to be very uniform, we can only have white families with this income level that have a mother and a father and 2 kids, and then we're going to have a study, and then we're going to publish something that has a conclusion about families based on this study. And I said, that's ridiculous. That's the tiniest little sample and not inclusive at all of anyone else. So I think through learning about psychology methods, I started to realize how passionate I was about racism and sexism, and especially within the scientific community. But just I started to realize that was what I was the most interested in those classes. So I sort of shifted gears, and I've always been a feminist for as long as I can remember. It's always been something I'm passionate about. I've always been very passionate about sex education. So I sort of switched gears and decided to really dedicate myself to that. And so I was just studying gender studies, and I had a professor a few years later who told us about a book reading going on at the Bluestockings Bookstore in the Lower East Side in Manhattan. And I went, and it was for the Feminist Porn Book, which is a book of essays by Tristan Taormino about the feminist porn industry. And I went, and it really sparked something in me where I was just hooked, and I was fascinated. And so from then on, that was really my point of study, and I married that with the lack of sex education in the United States as a sort of place to jump off from.
And when many people think of porn, they imagine pretty uncreative, non-authentic, really badly scripted and pretty uninspired work. So how are feminist porn directors, producers, and icons, how are they changing that?
Well, I think just because these are obviously people that care about porn and like porn because they want to make their own. So these are people who have a lot of experience watching it, and I think they then in turn know what it's lacking. So they're being creative in a sense where they're even just doing something new. And they are also very collaborative. So they're very interested in working with every single person involved in the project, making it very representative of many different people's interests and fetishes and whatever they have. And I think it's so interesting that you talking about how it's not creative, because so many of the comments the negative comments I've received on the TEDx talk that I did are from people, men mostly, who are indignant that someone is trying to change something, and they sort of have these attitudes of sort of, you're not going to be able to change this. This is what men like. Why would you try to change it? And it's just fascinating because, feminist porn is thriving because it's different and because it's interesting and because it's new. And it's so funny to me to see these comments of people that think that because it's new or different, it's forced. They think that it's being forced upon them, or that the difference in it is forced, when it's actually so much more natural because it's coming from what these actors really want to do and what they really see and then do in their everyday life.
And you mentioned on that TED talk that essentially pornography has become the way that people learn about sex, and this obviously speaks a lot to your other interest, which is in terms of sex education, how badly it's been done, over the years, where essentially it's been described as a what's the best way? It's pretty narrow view. It's like it's an anatomical way of thinking about things, and also even when it talks about anatomical, it's actually talking about heterosexual stuff, so that kind of narrows it in again as well.
Right. And in the States we have it's by state, so many states have very poor sex education requirements, which again I talk about in my TED talk, how many states don't, they require teachers to talk about abstinence, but they don't require them to talk about contraception. Many states don't have any requirements about the medical accuracy of that information. So it's pretty poor. I mean, it's getting better a little bit. President Obama cut all funding for abstinence-only education programs from the 2017 federal budget. So it's inching along, but even in places, I mean, like I said in the talk, I had a very comprehensive sex ed experience in my high school, but even comprehensive ones, they're not really that exciting. They're very technical. They're very based on the very classic, what is it? It's like, arousal, plateau, resolution, climax, resolution. It's very cookie cutter.
It's like a three act play, really.
Yes.
And
yes.
Yeah.
And the finish of the play is always ejaculation and orgasm, and it's usually male ejaculation and orgasm are said to be kind of synonymous. So there's a lot of, I think, even well-intentioned sex ed teachers that, because that's sort of the curriculum, a lot of other things get left out. And I think it teaches a lot of people sort of who's the priority here and who is kind of just participating as a secondary kind of, because that's how it works. That's how sex is. So, I mean, I think that there's a lot of innovative stuff going on college campuses now about new ways to do sex education, but it's a challenge because, I mean, I led a lot of sex ed classes and workshops at the new school, and I would hear these kids talk about their high school sex ed experience, and they were so varied, and some of them were just abysmal. Like, they were just like, no, nothing. We learned that you shouldn't have sex before marriage, and that's all we learned. Then they see porn.
Yeah. Well, that's what I was going to say. I mean, obviously, we live in a very different world. You talk about distribution and how that is affecting things as well. So, do the feminist these feminist porn directors, do they have a sense of that where that much of this sex education is not happening in schools for whatever reason? And so maybe the only way that people can learn, if you're 13, 14, 15 or whatever, and you want to know about this stuff, is to go online and to kind of find things online. Are they quite conscious of having that role of not just the kind of entertainment part, but the actual education part?
I think some of them are, absolutely. There are definitely some that that want to act as the sort of sex education you never had, and a much more obviously fun and adult version of that. But there are some that are very conscious of that, and also as a political act, I think they're very conscious of creating something that is feminist and inclusive. But I think there are others that don't necessarily want to be politically correct, so they don't really care about if they're being good role models to anybody, because it's not really about role models. It's just offering a more varied example for people. But I think I'm sure, I think they're all very much aware of that, because we see the effects of it in our society all the time. And I think many of them were in mainstream porn to begin with, and fell in love with porn, but obviously saw all the sort of problems that were there and wanted changes.
And the work that you do today as a researcher and as a speaker on these issues as well, can you maybe talk to us about a time when you've worked on a project, or a research project, or some kind of creative project you're working on, and you've put your heart and your soul into it, but for whatever reason it just didn't work out like you'd hoped, and more importantly, what were the lessons that you took away from that experience?
Well, the first time when I was first working on my TED Talk, which eventually did work out very well, but when I was first working on it, I think I had a few failures where it started as my thesis in school, and I continued the research, and then I wanted to turn it into a TED Talk. And I think I didn't realize at first how differently I had to translate it, or how extremely I had to translate it for a general audience. I think that as academics, we kind of forget that we're in a little bubble sometimes, and we're using language that is not necessarily common knowledge to the public. Mm-hmm. So I had a few iterations where I was presenting to, friends or people, and I was like, "This is amazing! What I'm saying. This is great." And they would sort of be like, "I don't really get it. I don't get it, because you're not bringing it to my level." And it's not about dumbing it down or anything, but it's just about putting it in language they can understand. So I think one of the best exercises I did was I went back to the new school, and I did the presentation for a classroom of gender studies, like freshmen or sophomores. And there was a professor there who was a mentor to me, and it was her class, so she let me do it. And I sort of said, okay, I want you to all take off your student caps, and I want you to now pretend that you are a plumber, and you are a soccer mom, and you are a college boy in Indiana. And I sort of gave them all sort of random characters, and I was like, now listen to this talk as if you are them. You have no knowledge of gender studies or feminism, and tell me what you think. And that was really hard for them, too. They didn't do a great job at doing that, because it's really hard to turn that off when you're doing it. But it definitely got me started on realizing the importance of knowing your audience. And it's a really good skill, I think, to be able to translate whatever you're saying into something that will really resonate with whoever you're speaking to, and kind of recognizing what that is and adapting to it. So, but the first few times I was coming up with the presentation, they weren't very good.
So, and we've had a number of people on the show that have given TED Talks, and everyone kind of finds their own kind of way of doing it, and their own path to doing it. What were some of the big things that you took away, actually, just from? So you mentioned this kind of going in and not doing it like an academic, not like delivering like an academic, but actually delivering it, as you said, where you're trying to reach the broadest number of people. Were there any other things that you learned in terms of, I don't know, just from a performance standpoint as well? Because you don't come from a performance background, you come from, research, academic, photography background. So that must, that must have felt a little bit kind of different for yourself. Yeah,
well, I actually did do this. Is nothing that you would ever see on the internet, thankfully. But I did a lot of sort of theater in high school, just very sort of nothing major, but a lot of like school plays, and I liked the choir and stuff. So performing was not necessarily at all frightening to me, but I was absolutely terrified to be on stage performing something that I had written, because that had never happened before. If it's a horrible play, then it's not my fault. I just am in a horrible play. But But it was the first time that I was presenting anything that I had written and something that I cared so much about. So I was absolutely terrified on the morning of. I was smacking my relatives when they were trying to give me a hug for good luck. I was my whole family was there, and I was absolutely terrified. But they were good nerves, and it gave me good energy when I was on stage. But yeah, I learned a lot about again, how to talk to an audience about something that is not something they're usually learning about. But yeah, the performance aspect wasn't so bad being on stage, but it was definitely being on stage with my own material was very scary.
And what kind of response did you get on the day from giving that talk? I'm also interested in the responses that you got online. Because just kind of going through the YouTube stuff, and this is the danger of YouTube.
Yes.
People say so. Were there kind of what were the kind of surprises, both good and bad, in terms of the feedback that you got from people?
So the feedback has been mixed. The day of, I got wonderful feedback from the people, my friends and family, obviously, but also the other people in the audience, the audiences of the other people that were presenting that day, their friends and family. I got wonderful response. A lot of people coming up to me and saying it was so interesting. As the weeks went on, and once the video was put online, the YouTube comments have been overwhelmingly negative, which I was expecting, so wasn't really a shock. But the other response has been very, very positive. The people who reached out to me, people, from miles and miles away who found me on LinkedIn, and reached out to me and said, thank you so much. I'm a researcher, or I thank you so much. I'm just a person and I never thought about this before. Or I had friends of friends of friends who I didn't know, but we were sort of weirdly connected, who would reach out to me and say, I've always felt this way, but I've never been able to articulate it. And, you've just done that for me. So I had a very, very good response from those people. I also sent it to several high-profile feminist writers and pornographers, and wasn't expecting to hear back from anybody. But many of them wrote back and gave me wonderful feedback. So it's always a danger with the YouTube comments, because there's a level of, obviously, anonymity, and anytime you have something with the word feminism in the title, it's gonna get beaten up to shreds. So I wasn't that was not traumatic in any way, but they're very entertaining actually to scroll through. I have a laugh sometimes going through them.
I know a number of women recently have. As a man, I find it utterly appalling. You see it happening all the time. There was a case here in the UK where we had a new banknote that was coming out, and I can't remember the person. It was one of the ministers, a female minister of government here, I think, that suggested. I think it could have been Emily Pankhurst, possibly for on this particular note, and there was this huge kind of uproar amongst a certain community. Who felt completely aggrieved because it was seen as a very kind of as a feminist political action as well, and some of the stuff that came from that, and I've noticed a number of. I think J.K. Rowling's actually quite very good at this. She'll actually read out these pretty horrendous tweets that come into his way of kind of turning it back. On the people that are saying this, and when you hear someone like that kind of say it in her voice as well, and you're like, I can't believe people can actually say this stuff as well. It's
pretty shocking. It's very funny. There are several people who in the comments. I have about 700 comments now, and there's a few of them that are like, I turned off after 4 minutes because it's so horrible, and it's sort of like, but you didn't even watch it. So there was definitely someone who said, people who have just said, I didn't watch this, but just by the title, I can tell it's terrible. Things like that, which are obviously just silly because you're not even watching it. There was the outrage and, like I said, the indignation of how dare you try to change my pornography just because you don't like it, which is kind of almost comical if you turn it around on, you have $1 billion porn industry, and feminist porn is like a teeny little side thing, and like, trying to just get a little bit of piece of the pie. But yeah, the indignation, many people, I have many comments that say some form of typical feminist wanting to ban something that she doesn't like, when my talk is actually about the opposite of banning pornography. So they hear what they want to hear mostly. And the other obviously aspect of that is, because it's a woman presenting, it's very much attack of the physical as well. there was another TED Talk of the day at my conference of a plus size burlesque dancer, her talk was about body positivity and reclaiming the word fat as a positive, and it was so funny comparing the comments, because on my comments, if they see me as conventionally good looking, the comments are, what you're saying is stupid, but can I swear on this?
You can absolutely swear. We might have to beep it out, but you can swear.
Okay, good. So saying things like, what you're saying is so stupid, but I'd you anyway, or comments about my appearance and saying she's a feminist, but I'd still her to death anyway. So it's just things of or shut your mouth, because things that are very aggressive and very based on personal appearance. And of course, if they don't find you conventionally good looking on my friend's TEDx talk, it's who cares what you have to say? You're a fat whale anyway. So it's really a lose-lose situation in that situation.
But I guess this speaks so widely. I mean, I think anyone that creates any work or puts himself out there in any way is going to get that to different extents. Is going to get that hatred come. So how do you? We've got listeners out there who are thinking about putting their first YouTube videos up of them singing this song that they've been working on, or it doesn't necessarily have to be in terms of giving a big TED talk to a big audience, but and they get those negative comments that come in. Is there any advice that you would give them in terms of how to take that and what to do with it?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, of course, just ignore the ones that are completely ridiculous and comical and have no basis in reality. And I think for me, a great lesson that I sort of started to learn even before when I was kind of forming the TEDx talk and after it came out with the comments, was that you're never, ever, ever going to please everybody, and that you shouldn't try, because if you keep butchering your project to try and incorporate everybody's feedback, then it's just going to fall apart. So my strategy has always been to find a few people who I really respect, mentors, who have a bit of a different, who all come from different backgrounds a little bit, but who I respect, and please them. Please your little group of people who understand you and whose work you admire and whose opinion you admire, and work with them to really form whatever project you're working on. And don't worry about pleasing all the random people who are just going to be angry because they're in their mother's basement somewhere.
And you mentioned, talking about distribution, how a lot of feminist porn directors and producers, they have a real issue getting the work out there, and because the industry's set up in a certain way. I mean, I always imagine that the porn industry has always been, you think, kind of ahead of the curve in terms of distribution, technologies, and things like that. So, but how is that being affected in terms of online and what technologies, where it's kind of going when it comes to the kind of work that they're creating?
Well, it's hard because, there's so much free porn online right now. So it's kind of getting to the point where why would anyone pay for any if they don't have to? And that's one of the problems is, with feminist porn producers, is that they don't have all the same resources that the mainstream porn industry usually has. So they need money to make these films, and they need money to make them ethically. That's the other big thing. It's like any industry. I mean, it's like agriculture. It's like the clothing industry. There's fast fashion, and then there's ethically made fashion, and that fashion's always going to be more expensive. It's the same with food. There's crappy food that's $2, or there's organically grown greens, and they're going to be more expensive. It's the same in any industry, and there's always the same problem of how do we get people to care enough to spend the money on the more ethically produced thing. So the problem with porn, of course, is that it's so easily accessible that the people paying for it now, my concern a little bit is that it's preaching to the choir a little bit, where feminists are buying it and enjoying it and helping it thrive. But my thought is always, how do we get this in the hands of the kid in the middle of Texas that has no sex education and whose only porn he's looking at is one very limited example of sex? And that's really the challenge, because he's not going to pay to go in some feminist porn site when he can just go to Pornhub and find something. So that's really the challenge, and I don't really have the answer to it, but I think that that's what a lot of feminist pornographers are now trying to do. And I think the sort of short-term answer is just keep talking about it and to get people interested in it.
I think it's fascinating. I think a lot of our listeners who are musicians will, what you're just saying just now, will chime with them.
Oh, absolutely.
Because it's very similar in terms of the way that distribution and the freemium thing has made it very difficult. And so you've had to be much more creative in terms of thinking about revenue streams and how you build your tribe. This kind of thousand true fans idea. And I would imagine in the porn industry there's a similar kind of thing where there's porn stars will have their tribe. They're people that are completely into everything that they're doing as well. And it's like, how do you monetize? How do you create an industry out of that as well? When it comes to, we think often about these famous creatives with a big C, and we think the Einsteins and the Yates and the Picassos and Titians and all these different people, and it tends to be the way that they often express is having quite strong kind of sexual drives to them as well. But when it talks about famous female creatives, that tends not to really, you don't hear about that so much, or it's maybe not pushed forward. I mean, I know that you've studied and spent a lot of time thinking about gender politics and sexuality. Have you ever kind of thought about that area and why this kind of highly sexual drive thing is something that's often thought about for male creators as opposed to females?
Well, I think that if you go a little bit further back in history, many women obviously could not express very much sexuality, even if they were very sexual people, just because it was not something that you could do, especially if you were trying to move forward with any sort of creative career. So I think that was just a symbol of the times, unfortunately. And I think another aspect of that is that when we learn about these creatives in history, we are often learning about it through a male lens, and it's often written about by men. I mean, history has been recorded often by men. So I think that it's not shocking at all that maybe the women's sexual lives or their more complex lives are often left out of the conversation, because women's contributions to the creative and the scientific and history are often overlooked anyway. So I'm not surprised at all that they often are glossed over in that sense. But I think that we're getting to a point, hopefully, where we are getting away from the slut and the prude, and we can kind of accept people as complex animals who can be academic or creative or professional while also being as sexual as they choose to be. But yeah, I mean, I'm not surprised at all if that's and often in times we desexualize women for different reasons. We desexualize them to make them more respectable in our minds. That was a huge problem. That's what we call respectability politics, and we do that a lot in order to make them more respectable in our heads.
It reminds me a little bit, there's the writer Elizabeth Gilbert was talking about this recently, where this idea of creativity has changed over the years. It reminds me, you were talking about body image and how, as an artist, or how our perceptions of especially female body image has changed over the years. And what we see now as being portrayed as an idealized body image is very, very different from what the Renaissance or the Greeks would have known as well. And one of the things that she mentioned, I think something I saw recently, was talking about how, going back to Greek and Roman times, they always, when they were talking about creativity and inspiration, it was always something that it wasn't being created by the individual. It kind of flowed through you, essentially. It was a much more wide, holistic view of creativity, where suddenly in the Renaissance, where essentially PR guys like Vasari and who made Da Vinci and Michelangelo very famous, suddenly it changed, where the creativity, it was the individual that was the creative. And a couple of interesting things that kind of happened from that was, one, that by doing that, it's suddenly a more ego-driven way of creativity, because, well, it's me, I've created the thing. And so it kind of did away with this idea of thinking, well, actually there's these ideas out there through different things, and essentially I'm just a vessel. These ideas kind of flow through me as well. And it did seem to create quite a certain view of what is a creative, into being very much about the strong, the individual. And you're talking about working in Manhattan, and the idealized view of the like the Mad Men, the ad guy. That's a creative. We think it's a very masculine type of character, where you're working every day in the marketing and advertising, and you're seeing obviously a very different view of what that's looking like today.
Of course, yeah, absolutely. And I think the girl who did the TEDx talk that I referenced earlier, which was about body positivity, she referenced a great study that basically argued that people begin to find attractive things that they see more often. So if you're exposed to one thing your entire life, you will think that is good and attractive. If you're exposed to a different thing most of your life, you will generally find that more attractive. So of course her use of that, then that was in the context of body image and body types. And her argument being, of course, that it's not your natural instinct to be attracted to this one body type. It's that's what you've been exposed to your whole life. And of course, that goes into advertising and it goes into our media, and just linking it back to feminist porn. I mean, that's what a lot of pornographers are trying to do now, to just show off more bodies, because frankly, I think they're just bored of seeing the same body types, but also as an action to say, there are people out here that look like this and they deserve to be involved in this too, because their bodies are not any less attractive. They are just not what has been put forward as the standard. But I think there's definitely an aspect of that creative ego that you're talking about in the porn mainstream world, and in the feminist porn as well. Any creative, I think, has ego in it. But I think that's why many people who are very protective of the mainstream porn industry are very aggressive about protecting it.
And just as we can just start to finish up here as well, I mean, we're talking about online and different things as well. Are there any online resources or tools like Evernote that you love? I mean, you're spending a lot of your time researching new areas, and I would imagine that you're living in words a lot as well. So are there any kind of tools or research that help you think about and corral all these different ideas and this research that you're doing?
You know, I don't really use Evernote or other online resources. I'm pretty traditional and low tech, in the sense that I just kind of accumulate everything that I'm reading and highlight and print out. And it's pretty archaic, but it works for me because I think that I'm a very visual person. So I like to have printouts of everything. I like to accumulate everything. I like Post-it notes. The real way that the internet helps me is finding resources and having resources established that I know I can always go to for inspiration, for to fill in a missing piece. I mean, I think it's a great idea to have a set of websites that you know will always offer you something new and interesting, and to check them every day or every few days, and that really helps me keep the flow going when I'm researching, because I have sources that I can follow every day, so that I don't feel like I'm starting from scratch all the time.
And if you were to recommend one kind of website, obviously not your own, but a site where someone is interested in this kind of area that you're researching, that they should maybe kind of go on every day, or kind of check in, what would it be?
Well, it's not really feminist porn, but Feministing is, a huge feminist website that I think most people know. But I think it's a great resource because it's so varied, and they post things in so many different areas of feminism that it helps not to get bogged down in one particular area when you're feeling kind of overwhelmed. So anyone interested in feminism in general, I would recommend just following them on social media, and they link to tons of other websites as well. So they're a great, I think, foundation website to have if people are interested in the topic.
And if you could only recommend one record and one book to our listeners, what would they be?
I think book-wise, I'm going to defy you directly and recommend two. The people interested in this, I would recommend the Feminist Porn Book, which was the book that sparked this interest in me originally. It's curated by Tristan Taormino, and it's a book of essays from people in the feminist porn industry, both actors, producers, and also academics studying it. And it's just fascinating about their experiences and their thoughts, and some of them didn't consider themselves feminists for a long time and then kind of did after a while. And it's just wonderful, and it's very easy to read, and I would recommend that for sure if anyone's interested in getting involved in this. Another book that I'm reading right now is a book of essays by Rebecca Solnit called Men Explain Things to Me. And it's not about pornography, but it's about feminism in general. And she has wonderful essays in there about mansplaining and about violence against women and violence in general and marriage equality in the States. And it's really great. So I'd recommend that. Record-wise, my favorite record of all time is Lauryn Hill, The Miseducation of Lauryn Hill, which came out, I think, in the 90s. And I put it on and everything else goes away and it helps me to clear my mind. So that's my record.
And let's imagine if you woke up tomorrow morning and had to start from scratch. So you have the tools of your trade, in your case, the pen, the paper, the bill, and you've also got the knowledge that you've acquired and being able to kind of research and think about these issues, but you have no contact, you know no one. How would you restart?
I think to restart, I think what I would like to do if I could go back was to start earlier. And I think I would try to second guess myself a little bit less. If I knew what I knew, I think I maybe would feel a little bit more confident at the very beginning and start earlier and start stronger. But I think I would just hit the ground running a little bit more, hopefully. And be a little less shy about reaching out to people and talking to people. It took me a little while to gain my sea legs a little bit. And I think going back, if I could restart, but knowing what I knew, I think I would be able to cut that out quickly.
Well, Olivia, thank you so much for coming on the show. Share the best ways that our listeners can connect with you and find out what you're working on.
Well, everybody can watch the TEDx talk on YouTube. If they just Google my name or search YouTube for my name, it'll come up. Right now, the only way to really connect with me is LinkedIn, but if you stand by, my website will be up soon, and there will be a contact page on there, and that will be a way that you can keep updated with my writings and other things that I'll be posting there. So that'll be the best way.
Great. And I'll make sure that we update, if people go to jamestaylor.me and just type in Olivia Tarplin into the search bar, they'll be able to get all the links that we're talking about, all the show notes here as well. And I'll make sure when your site does go live that we'll update that as well. Olivia, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been a pleasure speaking to you and learning about the work that you do. I wish you all the best, and I look forward to seeing your books, your writing coming out, and also seeing you do more and more talks as well.
Thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure to talk to you. Thanks for having me.
Hey, James Taylor here again. And if you're interested in living a more creative life, then I'd love to invite you to join me as I share some of the most successful strategies and techniques that high-performing creatives use. I put them all together in a free downloadable ebook that you can get by going to jamestaylor.me. That's jamestaylor.me to get your free downloadable ebook on creativity.